All right. Um, I don't know. I don't know how to open one of these podcasts. Uh, are you drinking coffee? All right. I wasn't sure if I should drink coffee or decaf coffee and go back to sleep after this because I only got 4 hours of sleep. So I made a half and half out of my Keurig, and we'll see how that goes. Um, so we didn't really pre-plan what we're going to talk about today. So today's going to be a little bit more of an open-ended episode, and we'll see if we crystallize around a topic, and we probably will, hopefully. I was telling Steven that I had a random thought yesterday about when I was in, I think, second or third grade, and my family, we were living in Woodbridge, and we were like relatively poor. We were like in a and not a great area of Woodbridge. And when I was in second or third grade, my teacher at the time recognized um, me to my mom at a parent teacher conference um, as a gifted and talented student. And she was like, "Hey, I think this guy should be in the GT program, but he's got a test for it to get in. You should take him." And I remember it was in the middle of um, some random work day or some random work day, and we only had one car because my dad took it to work, and I guess my mom's car was probably in the shop or something. So my mom made me and her walk through like this bad area of Woodbridge to get to like this uh this it wasn't like it was like an elementary school, but that was where the testing center was, but we had to like walk there through like not a great area. And we got there, and I took the test, and then luckily I passed, and it was a really big deal for my mom. Like I mean, obviously making us walk through like not a great area of Woodbridge already proved that it was kind of a big deal to her. But when I passed, it was a huge deal for her. And at the time, I couldn't really understand why. Um, but looking back on it and understanding what I know about labels and how they get put on you from an early age, I can actually see why it was such a big deal for my mom. And I think subsequently, anytime my siblings were in elementary school, she would proactively be asking like their teachers like in second or third grade, "Hey, this kid should go to the GT program, right? Yeah, yeah, you should definitely put him in." Um, so I don't know if you had any experience with when you were labeled as a GT student, Stephen, but that was my experience, and I didn't know how big of a deal it was. But I think it was a big deal, like as big as my mom made it out to be, looking back on it now.
Yeah, I think labels are super interesting, and I'm really excited for us to, I think, continue to explore labels like throughout this podcast, not just this episode, but subsequent ones. I my I my own personal experience is quite interesting. I think I've suffered from imposter syndrome at a really early age. Uh, this realization is kind of hitting me live as we're talking. I've always also had some of those labels put on me at a young age, but I don't think I ever believed it. And I can almost remember every single instance where some quote unquote authority figure has like told me to believe in it more. I remember this specific moment in particular where I was about to move back to America after living overseas. And I remember being in this class. My teacher took me aside. And it's really funny because this teacher I didn't quite like. And she just and not for any reason except for that, you know, kids are awful and like they'll roast teachers, and she was just not a teacher that the kids kind of like really uh, you know, really rallied behind. But I remember she took me aside and she kind of told me, it's like, hey, you know, when you get back to America, you need to make sure you go hard on all of these things. You have the potential more than anyone in this class, right? And I was like, no. I remember even like disputing. I said there was this other kid. His name was Madison, and I remember he was like, you know how I felt like this kid was like going to be future president. I was like, no, Madison is way better. And she's like, no, 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 no. Madison's cool, but like, you know, you got it. And uh, I remember that meaning a lot. Now, fast forward to me coming to America. I remember my first week of school here. I felt like an utter failure because I think because of that label. I came here and I had no idea what the kids were learning. I felt like and I didn't believe that I could actually kind of catch up. I thought my life was actually over at that point. So I don't know. This was kind of a long-winded self exploration down memory lane because I think you prompted. I think I think for anyone listening, I don't know if it does the same. Where you, as a kid, I don't know if it prompts the same thing, but um, I think for me it was probably a negative earlier on, unable to fulfill uh, some abstract idea of like what it means to be what gifted and talented. Right? Is the That's a horrible label, man. Actually, can we just stop for a second there as I talk? It's like, holy crap, we are. When does GT start? It starts pretty early, right? Like second, third grade.
Mine started in third grade, I think, and then going into fourth grade.
Oh my
Um,
gosh.
yo, fuck Madison.
Yeah, fuck Madison.
I'm just kidding. I'm sure
Yeah.
Madison's
No,
cool.
he was an asshole, dude. He was a
Oh
huge
yeah,
asshole.
yeah, fuck that dude.
What is it? It's fifth grade. Yeah, he's an asshole. So
I forgot that when we were talking about it, I completely forgot that like I grew up in the U.S. and obviously like that was much different than you growing up somewhere until you were so I guess for people that don't know, you grew up in on a military base in Japan until you were like 12 or something, right?
yeah, yeah, that's about right.
Yeah, so that must have been a completely different upbringing.
Yeah, yeah. Real quick, and I feel like we can devote a podcast to this in the future. But I mean, there's a term that I've only started recently using, or coming being accustomed to is third culture. Like people are described as, oh, I was a third culture kid, and yeah, I mean, to your just to ground everyone in this discussion, there's every time I say I grew up in Japan, people are like, oh, you grew up in Japan, you know, Japanese. Like, no, I didn't. I grew up on a military base in Japan, like an American like deposit, right? And then also America here too. So culture is interesting. You know, meta cultures, third cultures.
Yeah,
So
culture is definitely interesting.
yeah,
So you know what's interesting? So I always thought the GT label, looking back on it, um, and this is just from a random thought that I had yesterday. Looking back on it, I always thought that it was a positive thing, you know, to like have that label, and then that pushed me like it was almost like a fork in the road, and that pushed me like towards this other fork where I'm like, wait, you know, like people think I'm smart, so I could probably do this. So I viewed that as a positive. For at least a certain amount of time, it was a positive for me. Um, because I didn't know how powerful the labels were, but I think my mom understood at least that label was gonna stick with me, not just myself and my own psyche, but for like people um that I interacted with, you know, like when I'm like 8 years old and I go into my fourth grade class and there was like, you know, only like, you know, like 4 GT students out of 25 kids, and I'm one of them, then the teacher, knowing nothing else, has to kind of um, treat you different, you know, and obviously from in my mom's eyes, in a good way. Obviously, I know what the hell was going on. But I could see every Monday or something like that. You know, the GT students get placed into a different class, and then we learn like a bunch of cool shit that like other kids don't get to learn, and that's kind of dope. And that kind of sticks with you till like later. And I think like obviously middle school and high school are entry points where other people get placed into the GT program. But at that point, it became a lot more watered down, I think. But at the early age, it was kind of like, oh shit, like not just like a label that was positive for my own psyche, I'm guessing, but reinforced by the actions of the people, like the teachers and stuff that you have around you, and even like the other kids that were like, oh yeah, I guess you're in GT, so you're probably smart or something. But you know what's crazy? So all that shit hit a fucking wall for me when I was like in middle school. And this is coming out a little bit live too, but I've thought about this a decent amount growing up. So when I was in 8th grade, I took the test to get into TJ, just like many other aspiring Asian kids in Fairfax County. And the thing with me was Z. So Z was not. So Z wasn't GT until after I was in GT, and then my mom like kind of pestered Z's like 4th grade teacher or 3rd grade teacher to put him in GT. But then in 8th grade, Z is my older brother. He's 1 year ahead of me. In 8th grade, he got into TJ, and obviously, any Asian kid in Fairfax County probably knows some relative or some family friend that's also Asian, and that's also like, hey, my kid got into TJ. You know about TJ, right? So anyway, so Z got into TJ, and then so when I was in 8th grade, a year after that, I was expected to get into TJ. You know, and obviously, like this new label was like probably 100 times more shiny than the old label of, you know, the GT label, the one that everybody had getting up to this point. So for TJ, it was, I think it was like 2,500 people or something like that take the test, but they only accept 400 overall. And it's like a pretty rigorous process. Like the test is like an SAT, but for like middle schoolers, but it's probably similar to an SAT. And then so you have to like do well enough on that test to make it past the first cut. And then if you make it past the first cut, you're within like 800, the top 800. And then within the top 800, you have to get like recommendations from your teachers, and like they go through your essays and stuff like that. And then they decide, oh, like, you know, this kid is the total package. Take them in as a top 400 kid and welcome to TJ. And then your parents get bragging rights for at least the next 4 years until they decide on your college or whatever. So I didn't get into TJ, and oh my god, that fucked me up. And a major reason that fucked me up was because there was so much expectation around that, and there was so much expectation around the label, and you know, and my parents couldn't hide that shit from me in terms of like how they felt about that. You know, they were like, well, I guess you couldn't get into TJ. That's, you know, that's crazy. And I'm like, yeah, this is fucking crazy, isn't it? But you could tell, like, you know, they were like, well, Z got into TJ, so we're gonna get him a car because he got into TJ, and he needs to drive, you know, to TJ every morning rather than take the bus to your school and then go to TJ, right? So he deserves a car, but you know, you don't need a car, you can just take the bus, and you know, just stuff like that. So those 4 years, like when I went to Hayfield, and you know, Stephen, you went to Hayfield too. I was almost like a second class citizen inside my own house. So, but I didn't understand, like, you know, like the label of GT was good, but then this next label of, you know, that I was expected to get to kind of like, you know, to get treated the same way, I couldn't get that label. And then it was just like my 4 years of high school was just, in my family at least, was kind of like, yo, like, how come you couldn't get into TJ? And I was just like, you know, but yeah. So that was my experience with labels growing up. And the thing is, I was completely unconscious to this at the time. I tried really hard to get into TJ. When I didn't get into TJ accepts like a small handful of students, like from freshman year into like sophomore year. And my parents were like, yo, you have to try to get that. And but it's like a long shot chance. It's almost like no one even takes this chance, because you'd have to be like pretty willing to go through like a lot more to like do this, because like basically what you do is you have to take the SATs, and then you have to like reapply, and then you have to like get a bunch of teacher records and stuff like that. But but yeah, I went through all that. Didn't get in ninth grade year either. But I mean, that was much harder to get into than the year previously.
Awesome stuff, man. Awesome stuff. The more and more I meditate on the thrust of our podcast, the theme, the what, the so what, and we've had conversations about this as this podcast rolls on, but labels are just so powerful, man. At this point, we've devoted a decent amount of our cumulative time talking about it. I almost wonder. I would really love to be educated on this topic. I would really love for us to find the most accessible expert on labels. And it's got to be labels in different domains if you think about it, right? There's no like total expert on labels. Like I want to talk to like a teacher, or child development counselor or someone. It is super interesting, and it's interesting to me that these were the cultural labels of America, right? I mean, I believe, and I might be misspeaking, but like in a lot of Eastern cultures, don't you get I mean, my dad certainly told me that it was the case for him. You got a number ranking, right? Like, it wasn't you made it into a pool and then it's flat at that level, right? Like, you're in GT and then like it's flattened, or you get a percentile. Oh, I got 96%. It's like you were there was a number 1, number 2, 13, 21. Like, that's a freaking label too. And you might even remember, like, for a certain year what number you were, or what number you tend to be. I mean, you move forward with your class, right? So if you're like, let's say bottom 10, you go to the next grade, you're still going to stay there, like, relative position wise.
So it did seem like to me that there was almost like a hierarchy, like in Vietnam, whatever, when my dad was telling me about it. But it seemed to me like there was a practical reason for it. It's like if you didn't make a certain cut, then your ass is going to the military. If you're like over a certain threshold, then you're going, you're going to be a doctor or like whatever. So it seemed like there was like I guess in the US it's kind of like that too, but less stated, like if you don't you don't get into a certain college, um, then these are the types of jobs you get. If you get into a certain college, then these are the types of jobs you get.
Yeah.
But yeah,
It's less stated.
Numbering system is crazy.
Yeah, labels are crazy. Speaking of Hayfield, the high school that we went to, what really hit for me was when South County opened up. So our school, Hayfield, was quite overcrowded, and then there was another school that opened up where I think 90% of my friends ended up going to this other school and leaving behind, like, there was such a label there that occurred, and it didn't help that our first football game that we played, South County like stomped us, and it's just like the worst thing ever. And then we had that label now, a secondary label. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I think no one's going to deny the utility of labels. We had a whole podcast where we were talking about how it's necessary, right, to have constructs, to have labels. And the more macro you go, the more you need them for the utility. But it does seem like we need to be inoculated as a whole on how to responsibly relate to our labels. I guess this is where kind of like tiptoeing on the so what part of the podcast, which is that, I mean, yeah, there's probably a maladaptive relationship to labels, which is why, like, people are the way they are, and therapy is like cited so much as a important instrument. It is quite interesting. How would you, let's say you went back to coach or talk through young hack who had just not gotten into TJ. If you had the opportunity, how might you have helped younger hack navigate that? And I think you did it just fine, right? And I'm sure. And kids have to kind of develop their own tools. But if you had an opportunity, knowing what you know, what might you have said to help that guy out?
It's so it's actually hard. Um, it's really hard to be able to do so like in the moment, especially if you're like in this situation, because you also yourself have all these expectations. I'm sure my parents probably at least on some level understood. I mean, you know, my mom for sure understood like the uh maybe not explicitly, but on some level she understood how important the labels were. That's why they were so important for her, I think, to like, you know, push me towards like GT, push me towards like TJ and things like that. Or I guess it could have just been like an ego thing where she could brag to her you know, my uncles and aunts, oh look, this kid got into TJ, what about your kid? It could have been one of those two, but I guess I'll give her the benefit of the doubt. I think on some level she understood that. But even in those cases, my parents, and especially my dad, who's I consider a very aware person, um, when they're in this situation, they couldn't hide the disappointment. You know what I mean? Like even though I knew that they knew that I was just a kid at the time, you know, I'm like 13 or some shit, and obviously I mean I was probably an aware kid, but like I mean how aware could you be at 13? You know, and I think they understood that. But even then, they couldn't like uh navigate that situation in a manner that I felt like um was most ideal. But I'm sure that they definitely tried their best, you know, to because I think my dad's the type of person that understands, you know, after a certain point, you don't like look back like if you can't do anything about it. You know what I mean? So um and it's interesting that you asked that question because I'm not going to give you a theoretical answer. I'm going to give you a uh like I've actually experienced this on some level situation. So uh so you know my sister Mimi, she is to a lot of a lot of our friends, people that are my friends. A lot of times they look at Mimi, they're like, "Yo, that's like a younger version of you." And a lot of her friends, like when they meet me for the first time, they're like, "Holy shit, that's like an older version of you." And we I think we kind of look alike on some level. Like she just has like longer hair and a slightly bigger head, and she's like a short Asian girl, a short Asian girl, but I think we kind of look alike. But she so for those that know my family, all five of us went to UVA. And uh when she was the last person to, you know, go through her college admissions process, she obviously had some expectations to get into UVA and you know graduate from UVA, just because that was kind of like the bar that was set by all of her older brothers. And she had four older brothers that went there to also try to you know, help her through that process at the time. But Mimi got waitlisted to UVA and ended up going to Tech for a year. And so the parallel to that was probably very similar to me as an eighth grader that didn't get into TJ. I mean, Mimi was probably 4 years older than me at the time, but it was very similar. And I remember, you know, when she didn't get into UVA, you know, she was like really like, uh, yeah, go ahead.
The pressure is almost worse, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Like as you get older, you're more aware, more time has accumulated. Like the pressure must have been like way worse.
I'm sure the pressure was worse for sure. You know, her expectation was higher than mine too. Because I think relative to her getting into UVA, she was very like it was more expected to her to get into UVA than for me to get into TJ. You know, she was older, she had like all this help, and you know, and her four older brothers had already done it, so it's like very like relatively doable and stuff. And for sure it was doable, um but I mean, I think the fact that she went to like Lake Braddock, it was probably harder to get in from Lake Braddock than it was from like Hayfield or something like that. And you know, just like a bunch of other like factors. And then so she didn't get in. And I remember I was talking to her afterwards, and she was, you know, she was obviously like torn up about it. And I was like, dude, it's okay that you didn't get a UVA. I mean, you know, like you go tech for a year, and if you try to transfer in and you still want to after a year, you should transfer in. And she was like, what the fuck do you mean that it's okay? Like these last 4 years, like you don't think I could like feel the pressure that you know, that the only thing that mattered was to get the UVA. Like that was like the only thing that mattered. And she was telling me all this stuff. And then, and you know, I would have discussions with her, not just that discussion in that one period of time. I don't think I did a great job, by the way. I tried my best, but I remember that the like, I mean, it's hard to hide, like, you know, I mean, she was right. I mean, she's not dumb. She's very aware. So she could feel that the expectation was to get in the UVA, because you know we wanted her to be in DSA, play Turkey Bowl, you know, like go through the UVA first year experience, so that you know, so that we can connect on a deeper level. Be like, oh shit, like did you do that on grounds, or did you like where was your first year dorm, you know, and things like that, right? So I mean, so the disappointment was like, it's not something that you can hide, even when you know that it's like not helping the situation. So I mean, so I empathize with my parents when I was going through that, with Mimi. You know, obviously I tried my best, but I mean, what can you do when you're like, oh fuck, I wanted to talk to her about, you know, this and this, and I couldn't, right? So then I empathize with my parents a whole lot more there. Um, and also, so sorry, that was, I spent 4 minutes trying to set up the context, to answer the question that you had. What would I tell my younger self? Um, I remember I would have conversations with Mimi, and you know, and I would give her like, you know, tips on like how to study better, you know, and things like that. And I remember she told me, she was like, yo, it's not fucking fair that like Queenie, her, you know, my other younger sibling, who's like I think like 2 years older than Mimi or something like that. It's not fair that Queenie, all he does is freaking play League of Legends all day, doesn't study one bit, just shows up to class and then just gets all A's, takes the SATs one time, gets like a, I don't know, like a 2300 on it or something, you know, something like that, without studying, without any test prep, doesn't, you know, do any type of like work. And he's just like smart. And she's like, it's not fair. He just gets all A's. He just does all this shit. She's like, how am I supposed to compete with that shit? You know, like it, you know, it's kind of bullshit that I have these expectations on me, and then Queenie's over just bullshitting around, and and he's just like, you know, like he could imagine if that dude tried, you know. And she was like telling me this stuff, and I think the thing I told her, and I hopefully this stuck with her, because I think it kind of did, and I think it was helpful. I told her that, you know, intelligence isn't just measured like by one thing. Yes, like going to school, taking tests, and being able to do well in those, being able to like read a book and sponge up the information and regurgitate it in a manner like later, and recall everything. That's one measurement of of intel, and Queenie is really fucking good at that, and our school system happens to measure that like very highly. But there are many other types of intel and awareness that, you know, that you have that Queenie doesn't have, that is not measured in those damn books and on those tests. And you need to lean on those, because I was telling, I was like, think about it this way. I mean, I know your ass is like in you know, high school, or you know, or uh first year of college, or whenever I had to talk with her, but I've seen Mimi hustle her way out of so many situations, you know, by befriending her teachers, being able to talk to them on the side, and then, you know, and just like getting like uh almost like special treatment, because she has like the charisma to do to get people to like her. I've seen her be able to, you know, like obviously from a young age, I knew her ass had like, you know, boyfriends and stuff, and people like she could like get a boyfriend if she wanted to. She could make friends with people if she wanted to. You can drop her ass in the middle of a situation, and she can kind of figure it out on a social level. And I was like, you think Queenie's gonna be able to do like any of that stuff as easily as you can? In fact, Queenie would probably have some social anxiety if I was like, hey, go talk to this girl. You know what I mean? And so you know, some certain people are gifted with certain things and certain people aren't. And just because it's not measured on a test doesn't mean that you weren't gifted with something, and you kind of have to lean on that gift. So don't be comparing your shit to Queenie and saying that shit ain't fair, because you got some shit he doesn't have either.
Yeah.
And I think that stuck with her because she never asked me about that one again. Or maybe I just talked her damn ear off, and then so she just stopped asking.
That was great, man. Uh, so this comes at the point in the podcast where I take a moment out to recognize Hack. As I often do. Hack, you are one of a handful of people I know who are so good at coaching people through those types of situations, right? I know that you kind of hedged it by saying that you don't think you did a great job, but I think that having been on the receiving end of so many of your like boost up lectures like that, and also kind of empathizing and dropping into what Mimi must have felt hearing this from her older brother, I think you couldn't have said it any better, honestly, right? Uh, like I was actually taking mental notes as I was listening to that, which is funny because, and maybe I'm guilty of it as well, like self-rating myself really poorly on this, but I actually rate myself fairly poorly in the ability to coach in that way, and I feel like whereas I was very curious on what you were going to say because I thought it was so powerful that you were able to convey that just purely by bringing it down from their perspective, like mining out the data that's already available to them, right? But it's just like, hey, click this, pick this ore apart. There's all these things. Don't you see these gems here? Whereas for me, I find myself needing more to like relate on a personal experience and sharing that, and sometimes that helps people, right? Sometimes people like hearing like a personal experience that you went through, knowing that you went through it yourself, and sometimes people don't, right? And you have to, I think that's a skill to know. I imagine if you offered up you talking about how you went through the TJ thing, and like what you realized out of it, like it wasn't like the biggest thing. I probably would have opened up with that more, and so I thought that was really great, man. So, how did she kind of take it? I mean, in a generalized way. Obviously, it's not a one-off conversation or a singular thing, but like, did you feel like it kind of maybe let's do beginning, middle, and end, right? So you first said it in the beginning portion of that. Did it feel like there was some kind of hit there? And then as it evolved to middle and evolved to end, how do you feel like it went with Mimi?
So this was probably a conversation that happened like not just in one sitting. I mean, it was probably over the course of at least like, months, if not years, where we're kind of like a little bit back and forth about this. Cause I'm sure it wasn't one of those things where we just sat down right afterwards. I mean, yes, there was a conversation where we sat down right afterwards after shooting in the UVA, when she was obviously like, beat up about it. And I was, there to talk to her. And honestly, like, I mean, my memory is probably not as good as it used to be. And this was like, like 8 years ago or something like that. So, so from her perspective, and it might be interesting to get her perspective, she'll probably be like, what the fuck, you didn't do any of that. It's probably like she was probably like, yo, you told me I had to like transfer it or something. I don't know, but I think over the course of about the couple years or whatever, through the situations where she was like, yo, what the hell, like it's not fair that Queenie like can just do this, and people expect me to do this. If I had what Queenie had, I'd be going to UVA without even trying to. But how come I have to try so hard and everyone expects me to do so? I think I helped her navigate through that, and understanding that I think growing up through the school system, especially in an Asian household, when an Asian household that cares about grades and like what college you go to, what high school you go to, even, and whether you're GT or not, like I I think it's really easy to use academic achievement as one of the biggest indicators of your own self worth.
First generation too,
Yeah,
right?
first generation too, and yeah,
War, refugee, diaspora
right.
is like extremely important, and I think in this conversation, being first generation Vietnamese.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, I don't put that on the first generation to make education important. I mean, it's like really it was probably super fucking practical to be like, yo, we don't have any, like we don't have a lot of money, but we need you to make some money. So like, when you play StarCraft and you have a certain build order, and you know that this build order is pretty efficient because everyone uses it,
Yeah,
and even if you could master this build order, then you're better than, I don't know, 80% of the people that play. Just by being able to build in this order, you'll be ahead by the time you're at this point in the game. And then at that point, you can just do whatever. You have an economic advantage or a military advantage, and you can just, uh, even if you were worse off in terms of like technical skill, you could still do well. It's kind of like that. It's like you come over to like this random ass country as a first generation Vietnamese family like mine. You don't speak the language. You're not. It's not your first culture. Um, Trying to fit in, raising kids in the family, you need to give your damn kids a build order. And that build order is, hey, take your ass to school, read these damn books, learn how to do math. You better get all A's. You should not have an excuse to see. I better not see a damn B on that report card. Get GT, getting a TJ, getting a UVA, and then at that point, uh, I mean, wait, sorry, one more thing: engineer, lawyer, or doctor.
yeah,
And after
yeah.
that, do whatever the fuck you want. Like, and the thing is, that build order is a pretty effective, efficient like build order where once you graduate from UVA or whatever college,
Dude,
and
it's not do whatever you want. It's get married and have kids. You're how old now? Like,
I
you
guess I
know,
guess I guess
it
that's
goes
the
on forever.
I guess that yeah, I guess that's part of the build order too, and I haven't gotten there yet. Clearly,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I missed the memo on that one, but you know what I'm trying to say. Like that's the build
Totally.
order that was given to us. Um, Shit, man. I do this all the time where I forget why I started talking about build orders.
We should do a podcast talking about build orders, actually. And, well, one, because well, honestly, we should probably just do a podcast that uses, breaks down gaming and the metaphors that we want to use going forward, because they're like, it's not, gaming itself is so powerful as a way of kind of explaining life. I mean, if I had to going back to the advice deal, if I was giving advice to somebody and they understood games, like it would be so accelerated. Which is why I think I have to teach my kid games so I can continue to use those metaphors. And even I don't know. So I that's what I was thinking. We should definitely do one for games. Build orders are powerful, right? Prescribed, iterated upon, proven. They're empirical in a strong way. So. As you were talking, another thing I thought was really interesting is that if we superimpose or cross-reference like generational like hierarchy, right? First generation, second generation, third generation with like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Like first generation is definitely take care of your bottom level, right? And I think that we are so freaking blessed because in one generation, like we are able to jump to like self-actualization. Um, you know, in a more normal paced world, it wouldn't be until we had kids, or even our kids, where we said, "Hey, you want to study art? Study art," you know, instead of like, "Hey, you need to study something that will make sure you bring an income," because you're like, I mean, I'm not going to be passing any generational debt to my kids, I hope, or any of that kind of stuff. They're going to get a clean slate. They're going to get to do pretty much whatever they want. So yeah, I mean, build orders, any type of, I think here's another thing, right? I think any type of like hierarchical exploration, like I think that we are in a world bound by hierarchies, right? Like the universe itself is just matter that organizes itself in higher and higher levels of patterns that, you know what I mean, that require more and more energy to keep stable. And if you like break that apart, energy explodes, right? And so I think it's just interesting to examine all the hierarchies around us. And I think that for some people, when you hear the word hierarchy, it might bring up ideas of elitism or superiority or any type of that like Darwinistic thinking. But again, one thing that we always go back to is that none of that is zero sum, right? There's infinite hierarchies, a multiplicity of even conjunctive hierarchies, and that like we should go and expose them because just, you know, there might be a hierarchy out there that is untapped, that like this specific set of people are should like open up for humanity, or that if they even were more aware of it, they would know how to climb a little bit better, right? It's like, imagine, here's another metaphor, imagine you're rock climbing, right? And I don't know if you know rock climbing. I remember when the first time I went rock climbing, I was like, oh, this is easy. I just like grab whatever thing. But you're supposed to follow the route, right? You're supposed to follow the route that they prescribe. For whatever reason, they prescribe it. But, and that's an artificial rock wall. But when you go to a real rock wall, you do whatever nature did and whatever guide climbers did for you. But then you might explore a different route, and you might not even know like a foothold existed, right? Like a climber might climb on a route that has been known for 5 years, but they found out if you like put these three fingers like this and like just angle it right here, it's another hold that didn't, you know what I mean? And so I think, I'm also kind of rambling here, but I think this idea of pathing, this idea of build ordering, but the like the going down, the proven, the extrapolation thereof, the awareness of different types that are available so that you could have a brain that seeks for them, is probably the versatile, resilient type of person, mind that we want to go forward into the future with, right? Especially as life, the economy becomes more creative, like, you know, intellectual commodities become more prized versus material ones. So very interesting stuff. Build orders, man.
I
Build
really
orders.
like in the beginning when you said the idea of superimposing Maslow's hierarchy with different generations. That really stuck with me, and saying, you know, hey, like, you know, we can, in one generation we can go from like the bottom two rungs of um you know, I guess like food and water is the bottom one, and the second rung is like, you know, security, like housing, shelter, um to the higher rungs. You know, a third one is I think like love and relationships, and then the fourth one is there's five, right? The fourth one is esteem, I think, and the fifth one is self-actualization. So being able to go from like the bottom two to three, and then you know, in one generation focus on the three, four, and five. I mean, that's like pretty dope, because I know like like for my family, I think I remember why I was talking about um build order in the first place. And let me just hit that so I can close that loop. Um, I think we were kind of like not like shitting on, but like we were kind of like, man, like, you know, these expectations that are placed on like these poor little kids, like, you know, myself or like Mimi and stuff like that. And clearly like these labels, they were helpful, but then like they might have ended up hurting more than helping, and then, you know, causing all this pain and grief and stuff like that. Like, what the fuck, right? And so you might like look at that and be like, you know, these uh you know, like, what the fuck are our parents doing? I mean, you know, and I was trying to explain what the fuck our parents are doing from the perspective of somebody that comes over to like a foreign land and tries to raise kids in a culture that they don't know anything about. Like, you have to have a build order. You know, this build order works, and it's a really good build order. I know when my dad told me when me and Z got into UVA, and we already knew this before that. I think sometime in high school. I remember my dad would always put away $100 each month for each me and Z. Every single month, $100 of his paycheck would go into a savings bonds for me and Z since we were like as long as I can remember. Um, and from a young age, eventually my dad told us, he's saving up for me and Z to go to college. But then like when O came along, he was like, hey, like I'm not gonna have enough money to pay for O, so you guys have to go to college and I'll pay for you guys. But then you guys have to be able to get jobs and pay for O. But then like Mimi and Queenie weren't even like planned really. And then so obviously it was like, oh wait, oh, you gotta help pay for Queenie, and Queenie, you gotta help pay for me. It was kind of like superimposed onto us, like, from whatever age we were old enough to comprehend that we had to, my dad was doing this for us, but then we had to do it for the next, and they had to do it for the next. So all of us can get at least 4 years of college, because make sure all of us can have the resources to make it through that build order. And what my parents were doing was like, they did the best they could, because they knew this build order worked, and whatever they had to do to kind of to I guess like make us understand how important education was, because you obviously needed to take education seriously to execute on this build order. So that's what they were doing, and obviously intentions 100% good. And I think mostly I would say we turned out much better because of it. And I don't want to be nitpicking at like the negative things here and there, and just pretend like it's all negative, because I think most of it was positive. So just to tie up that loop, they were doing a build order that works really well for first generation foreign immigrants. I don't remember if you asked the question, but I just wanted to close that loop before we moved on.
Yeah, no, I don't think I had a question, but I completely agree with everything you just said.
I wonder what the build order now is currently with the landscape it is. Like, let's say you were just like, and are build orders different if you're second generation? They could be. Um,
Yeah, I think they absolutely are. Well, so here's one thing. Even in the first generation, I didn't have that build order that you had,
mhm.
at all. At all. My parents, funny enough, I often give the feedback that I wish I had more of that in my life. My parents basically let Kim and I raise ourselves. Kim being my little sister, wasn't given any direction, and it was very anxiety inducing. Like the last time I could ask my dad for help. So my mom unfortunately, barely eked out a high school education, and mostly was a homemaker. And my dad was able to have a career in the civil services, but even with that, I stopped getting help on homework at around third grade. Just couldn't match, dad would teach me long division, but it was like some archaic Vietnamese way, and I would get so frustrated, and obviously couldn't help with English. I remember even in fourth grade, my dad was asking me to proofread his resumes for him, right? And so, but I never got the pressure from my parents to be something at all. And if in anything, I almost felt like it manifested in me a need for validation and approval that I could never get, because I would bring home A's. I got into gifted and talented, but my parents didn't know what the heck that meant, nor did they really care. They're like, oh, that's great. And I'd be like, oh my God. So it was like infinite cap. There was no ceiling. I remember when I got into UVA, my parents didn't understand what it meant. My mom wanted me to go to GMU because a week later she started talking to her friends, and it was like, oh, it's cheaper and you get to stay home. And I had to explain to her no, this will be worth it, I promise, right? So I've never had that. So it's interesting that even there's a lot of variation even that first playthrough. But my parents gave me the support in all the other ways. So in Maslow's hierarchy, right, they gave me all of the love, the food, the shelter, the security, all of that. Not as much some of the push, but yeah, it is interesting. It's quite interesting. And I mean, don't get us wrong. Like, I do think that this is where we venture into political territory, I must say. But, you know, I think a lot of the immigrant groups that have come to America have performed disproportionately well, especially from certain countries. But it's not always the case too. Like we also know, I think, a lot of folks in this first generation immigrant group that, for some reason or other, didn't do as well as we were fortunate enough to do. And it's not all one like monolith, right? Even within my own extended family, it's been challenging. So I don't know. I don't know if that build order was just something that was intrinsic and just happened to be exported, and planted a while long before we can even imagine. Because it's not all the same, for sure.
Yeah.
And I mean, all five of you guys, I'm sure, are going to have different build orders for your kids. I don't even know what mine's going to be. And I think it's going to have to depend on the kid. I'm coaching now, right? Thai boxing, and I'm struggling with this live as a coach because every single person has a different personality, different attributes. The goal is still the same: win the fight, right? Mm-hmm. Don't get hurt the other person more than hurt you. But man, some people, I mean, just the variety of people in terms of in a fighting context is insane. And as a coach, you have to be able to drop in between all of them. So anyway, I think there's probably, the answer will always be like fluid and adaptability. Going back to the build order context of, I guess StarCraft is the one that we usually lean on for this. There's like economic builds, there's tech builds, there's mass, like does it just have as much as possible, there's
It's
superimpose.
I do think obviously with second generation there's less of a necessity for a build order that results in you being like a doctor, lawyer, or engineer. And even within my family, if that the span between Z and Mimi is 15 years or so, and Z and O definitely had to, and maybe O definitely had the expectation going into college that he needed to be an engineer, but me and Z for sure. But then when me and Z graduated from college and O was still like a first or second year, we started doing really well in poker, and that kind of like made sure O's education was paid for, and for sure Mimi and Queenie's, and we put that away too. So when Mimi and Queenie went to college 4 years after O, there was no expectation. It was kind of like, yo, just do what you think's interesting. They probably went with the major that I would have went with if I would have been able to pick for myself, which is cognitive psychology for both of them. And I think they had different concentrations or whatever, but that was something that they were like supernaturally interested in, where it wasn't like, yo, you better pick mechanical fucking engineering so you can get a job. It wasn't like one of those. And interesting because I know you picked English, and I probably wouldn't have been able to pick English without a lot of like pushback from like yo, I didn't pay for your college to go there, so you can't get a job afterwards, because it's not the same as, and obviously like you did fine after graduating with an English degree, but the expectation is different if you get an English degree or an engineering degree or like imagine if I got like a philosophy degree, my parents would kill me.
No, totally.
So I'm actually, I think maybe a future pod we could talk about current build orders based on the landscape, maybe not even for first or second generations, but just in general, what are the options? Because I don't think the build order of going to college for 4 years, and paying all that student debt and tuition is as powerful as it once was. I think the game has, they kind of nerfed that a little bit and brought it back more towards the middle. But also with the internet and the fact that you can learn anything on YouTube now,
Mm-hmm.
there's almost like too much information out there that if you knew how to parse through it, you could probably get a relatively um, good education for free and make yourself useful. Uh,
Yeah.
what does that mean for build orders, and what's the best build order? And like knowing that now, um,
I think college is still the build order, by the way. I think it's
I,
so underrated. Um, I think that what you, this could be a different pod, but one thing I feel passionate about saying, and it's not obvious to people until they try to do their MBA programs, by the way, that mostly why you but do an MBA is not really learning the material. It's actually to tap into a network, right? Your MBA class will be the people that might be your future business partner down the line, right? And when I think back at UVA, I think about how the value of that time at UVA was all the stuff outside the classroom. Like, how do you socialize, organize, and be around people of that level, right? Like your peers that are executing it. And all we went to a very good college, and all of our peers are now like successful people doing all those things. Like it was a hey, how you like we learned how to be around those types of people. Us being one of those people too. Don't get me wrong, right? Uh, and now like I go into my job, you can drop me into any like cohort of random people trying to do a thing with a certain level of aptitude in certain levels areas, and like oh it's a group project, like right away, and I know how to like converse with them, and we have a shared background. We both know what it was like to live in a dorm, right? Like maybe we never talk about that, me and this, but like it's there. It's gonna forge. It's gonna accelerate so much of like the unspoken. So I think that there's value almost in always doing whatever is mainstream in a way, like participating in it, even if you're not over indexing on it, right? Like I think the problem has been that people think that it is what is that word? I never know how to pronounce it. Panacea, like like a thing that solves everything. Like it
Panacea.
won't be. Yeah,
Like
panacea. Yeah,
is that how you pronounce it? I just made that up.
that sounds very right. I think it sounds more right than anything I came up with.
And that means like
Um,
silver bullet type of thing.
Yeah, yeah. Like that just will just it's just like the thing that's just gonna fix all. And so um yeah, so I think that I guess my main takeaway in closing here, I think it'd be a good time to stop and devote the next one to build orders and stuff, is that the more I'm naturally if there's is it captured in Big Five, right? The personality theory. Like I'm naturally pretty anti-authoritarian and rebellious, like at a very young age, and continually find value in the mainstream, which is like a duh. Like that's why it's mainstream. That's why it's the meta game, right? But it always cracks me up when I get to the end of a logical endpoint, and I'm just like, duh, you like do you go to college, you have kids, you have a house, like it's a great freaking build order. That's why everyone has been doing it forever. Why are you trying to be so original? So yeah.
Yeah, I think in the big five, there's agreeableness, and that probably
Uh,
captures the um, likelihood to follow authority or not.
yeah. So
Yeah, this is probably a good place to start. I think build orders could be a topic in the future. I do think it'd be really interesting just to see what the landscape would be like now. Like for instance, let's say you drop my parents in this country
mm-hmm.
like 5 years ago. Like would they? I mean, they would probably still be like, yo, go to college for 4 years. But then like growing up, like for me to see like, oh, the reason they want me to go to college is because they want me to be financially secure. Like, what would I have done instead? Because obviously my parents wanted me to go to college, but then somewhere along the lines I figured out, oh, they wanted me to go to college so I can make money to support the family. And
Yeah.
then 2 years into college, when I saw the shortcut, which is like to play online poker,
Yeah.
and that's when I my grades like went from like a 3.4 down to like a 2.1 or some shit. But then
Yeah.
I got the end goal, you know.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
yeah, build orders for a future podcast. Hey, I'm gonna stop recording now, and then we can
Miss
talk
it.
talk more later.